Good evening, class. I hope you're all well. I'm at the wedding today, but this is your video class. I do not believe that this will go the full 2.5 hours, but if it does not, I will have supplemental work for you. So, you have turned in your family narrative, I assume. Again, you are to turn it in to me electronically tonight by uh, Valley4 Gmail, and you are to have put a physical copy of it in my faculty mailbox in Sorley House. I gave you this direction to everyone tonight. Tonight being September 11th, on Tuesday. It is 11:38 p.m. right now. Uh, I, it, you know, pardon me. If you are only accessing this on class time at 7 o'clock Thursday or later, then any of you have not already submitted, then you are late, unfortunately. This is going to be continual, so I encourage everyone to get things in on time. All right, so you've done your family narrative, and you found out some things about your family and hopefully about yourself as well. That is good. Now, we are going to go into secondary research. And for secondary research, I mean we are going to go into the comic book project. Now, again, I believe earlier today, Tuesday, I sent you all a link to a free online comic book reading website. You do not have to pick from these books that I sent on the site. Not at all. You can if you want. You don't have to, but you can if you wish. I just sent that link, so things might be a little easier for you. All right, so now we're getting into comic books at this point. Now, comic books, actually, let me go backward. Everything tells a story, one way or another. Uh, Different kinds of rhetoric, different kinds of devices, narrative, etc. Uh, they tell from different viewpoints, from different narrators, reliable, unreliable, etc. However, and I don't know if any of you have ever read comics before, or if you have ever read them in an academic setting. And this might be the first time you're reading them in an academic setting. Okay. Well, in order to understand them, really read them, you have to understand the language of comics. Now that goes for anything. You have to understand the language of something when you read it. Now, unlike many other books, as you kind of see behind me, I have a fair amount of books, and that's just one of my 3 bookcases in this apartment. I will probably eventually be crushed to death one day, but hey, what are you gonna do? Uh, so, um, yes, you have to understand the language of any book you read. And comics have a different language than usual, that you're used to. Comics have a visual language. Now, you are used to visual language because I assume, you have all watched television and videos on the internet. And we have certain visual cues, certain visual storytelling methods. And some of these storytelling methods are translated over to comic books, but not all of them. And the reason why, and this is one of the big differences between comic books and film. Film happens in time. Comics happen in space. Comic books do certain things to manipulate your sense of time, making panels larger or smaller, changing angles, things like that. But ultimately, you, the reader, set the pace. Reading comics is a constructive process, which is not like film whatsoever. Film is a passive process. In film, you sit there and you watch, kind of like you're watching me right now, and you just take in the information. It's passive. There's no dialect going on. There's no back and forth. In any book, either visual or not, there's a dialect. You are a partial creator of the story you're reading. You have to understand the words you read, and in this case, you have to understand the visuals you see. So comics are written in a visual language, and that changes how you perceive a story or a point or a time. Now, a very good resource, and I would make note of this and underline it and star it, is the book Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. I would highly recommend anyone having that as a primer. He did do a follow-up after Understanding Comics. He did another. He did a second. Your library may have it. I'm not sure. I haven't checked, but any good library has it at this point, actually. Now, all right, my pad. So, comic books tell stories in different ways than either novels or film. They use space instead of time, unlike, like film. Unlike film uses space. But unlike novels, they communicate a fair portion of the information they contain through visuals. For instance, in a novel, you'd have to read something like uh, the hired killer stood on the stair and waiting for the victim to come around the corner as a bead of sweat rolled down his forehead. Could he do this? Did he have the guts to be a hired killer? Could he really be a made man in the mafia? Da 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 da. And you get into his thoughts. But in that description, I did not tell you the color of the man's clothing. I didn't tell you what the man looked like. However, you probably already have an idea of generally what he looks like. Now, in comics, you're not going to get all that description. You'll see the visual. You'll see what the man looks like. You'll see his clothing. You'll see, on what step he's standing, on the stair, waiting around the corner. You'll see, you might even, depending on where the camera is, you might even see how far the victim is from turning that corner. But they give you other information. Now, comic books today have gotten away, by and large, have gotten away from thought balloons. That used to be a way you can tell what the character is thinking, obviously, much like novels. However, they've gotten away. They've gotten into more cinematic influences in the last 10, 15 years, for good or bad. And that's a whole other point I don't feel like debating right now. You see how they use things. They use camera angle, they use color, they use size. Something that is large, a large panel, will slow you down as a reader. You're taking in more image. As the panels shrink, you naturally tend to speed up as a reader. So they can manipulate your sense of time, but only within a certain framework, right? They also use sound effects. Now, not like movies. Movies have music. Movies have, all the special effects. Comics, even though people who have never read a comic are familiar with the idea that comics will use sound effects like bam, biff, pow, and other things that remind you of the 1966 Batman TV show. Even if you've never seen it, I'm sure you're familiar with it somehow. So, comics will suggest things to you that you then interpret. Again, it's still a constructive exercise. You are still a participant. You are probably less a participant in creating the story than you would be in a novel, but you are more of a participant than you are when you're just watching something on a screen like you're doing now. So they use visual elements and they use space to suggest certain things and to try to get you to feel. They use camera angles, like they'll use a close-up, like of a giant shocked, open eye, oh no, or maybe they have a worm's eye view of a bad guy walking away to suggest he's big and dark and scary because the light's coming from behind him, so you can't see his face, all this other stuff. So they use these, but they also use visual interplay between the visuals and the words, the balloons or the text boxes. There is an art slash science to placing balloons and text boxes. I learned that myself, and you can really screw up a mood. You really screw up a story by placing things in the wrong uh, place. And Americans, generally, we there is a pattern. There's a reason behind these things. Americans, we read. Oh, sorry, everything's backwards. It's a camera. It's facing the other way. So we read from the top left over to the right, and like in a novel, we go down one, and we go from the top left down. Everything's backwards. Down to the bottom right. So this over here is the first balloon, and this is the last one, generally. If this is the first balloon, and this is the second, and over here somewhere is the third, that's not going to make any sense. We can't follow. So basically what I'm telling you is that everything is set up the way it's set up for a reason. Now, there are pros and cons to a comic story, like anything. The pros are it's visual, it's colorful, it's nice, and all this other stuff. The cons are that it can still only do certain things. For instance, you can see some of the emotion on a character's face, but you can't see everything they're thinking or everything they're feeling. And like I said, the industry has gotten away from thought balloons, excuse me, to tell you what he's saying or he or she is thinking. And I think they got away from this because sometimes it's redundant or it slows things down too much. I mean, if you see someone with a scared face, you can kind of generally see or feel what they're feeling. But to say, oh, well, I'm feeling, you have a thought balloon that says, oh, I'm scared, but I'm also slightly nauseous and a little bit bored. It's going to slow things down. So they don't do that anymore. So there are limits. You are going to lose something, but you can still create that something through your act as a reader, through your construction of it as a reader. So the other thing, and something that you might be thinking about right now or in these next few weeks, because of your papers and what you're going to research, is theme versus main idea. Theme is generally what it's about. Like the theme, it's about sadness or about remorse or loss or happiness or revenge or whatever. Main idea is different. Main idea is the main idea of the story. I mean, are they getting revenge for you killed my brother, I'm gonna kill you, in an old western? Or is it the main idea to steal the diamonds or what have you? So there is an interplay. And recently in the comic industry, now again, you can choose whatever you'd like, but I would caution against a fair number of recent comics, and by recent I mean over the last 8 years or so, because there has been a political ideology creep in the industry. Essentially, there's a lot of far left ideology that unfortunately many writers have decided to have those ideas override the story. And when that happens, or when any idea, I'm not saying this against the left or anything, but when you have any ideology that overrides the story, overrides the narrative, it it becomes garbage. I mean, too much rhetoric is a bad thing. Um, you may remember, excuse me, you may remember the man who was running, I believe, for governor of New York a few years ago, and he had that funny hairdo. And his whole bit was that he was running on the rent is too damn high, from the rent is too damn high party. He made an independent party for that. Well, good for him. But um, the thing here is that it was a one note song, so it was kind of ridiculous. And when these writers in the last few years have put politics over character, put politics over story, they become one note songs and it becomes bad. It just, it does. You're not focused on the story anymore. You're focused on, standing on your soapbox. So now, the other thing you have to ask yourself when reading these and when writing, when writing your paper, how is this comic using rhetoric? I mean, what devices is it using? Right? Is it cajoling? Is it using bandwagon? Is it trying? What is it using? How is it using it? What devices is it employing to get you to see things or be on the side of the writer? Every story does this. Um, no matter what story it is, every story is going to do it. So, but just pick out, what they're using, what they're doing. How are they trying to convince you? What rhetoric are they using to convince you that this guy is good, this guy is bad, this is what's going on, this is how you should feel, this is the person you should root for. And I talk in terms of stark contrast, good guy, bad guy. I'm not talking about just superhero books. I mean, that's, good guy, bad guy is the unacademic way of saying protagonist, antagonist. And I'm sure you've heard that before. I mean, not maybe that particularly, but you know the definition of antagonist, you know the definition of protagonist, and I'm not going to belabor the point here. So, okay. So yes, and actually I do have your sheets, which I don't have on me. I thought it was right here. If you'll excuse me, I'll be right back. I'm going to get it. All right. Okay, so list of rhetorical devices. Very useful. Do they use illusion, which is a reference to a person, place, or event? Comics often use illusions, which is part of what puts some people off from picking them up because they're too dense. Like they refer to something that happened 5, 10, 15, whatever issues ago, and people can't follow it. It gets to be too much. You got to buy too many books. Anecdote, a short, entertaining account of some happening, frequently personal or biographical. Sometimes they use characters will use anecdotes. Aphorism, not many aphorisms in comics, I wouldn't think. Appeal to authority. Oh, by the way, you should be writing all these down. The appeal to authority, which is a citation of information from people recognized for their special knowledge of a subject for the purpose of strengthening the speaker or writer's argument. They'll put words in the mouths of the hero. I'm just going to use superhero comics as everybody knows them. They'll have what they want to convince you of. They'll have the hero say. What they want you to not believe, they'll have the villain say. They have the appeal to fear, which is an emotional appeal. Uses information likely to frighten the audience for the purpose of strengthening a speaker's or writer's argument. Oh, I'm going to take over this dam. Oh, or the X-Men are a well-known allegory for racism. We're going to register mutants. We're going to, put them in camps. We're going to take their powers away. All this other, It's an appeal to fear. Appeal to patriotism, also emotional appeal. It appeals to the audience's love of country, persuading them to act by implying they are treasonous if they choose not to, which is similar to an appeal of pride. And again, the superhero, Superman, red, white, and gold, Captain America, red, white, and blue, all these very colorful people wrapped up in almost personal flags to fight crime. And the other thing, too, is that most heroes, as a general rule, are constructed partially on an appeal to patriotism. Why? Because heroes enforce the law. It's that simple. They enforce the current law. Sometimes they'll have things where, they might have a conversation about whether it's a good or bad law, but they enforce the law. I mean, even, they are of the state when you get right down to it. Or at least, of morals. Maybe not of the state so much, but of morals. They are of the moral majority, let's say. Next is the appeal to pride. Used to convince the audience that they must act in order to maintain dignity and self-respect. Basically, you should act this way. And as far as they must act in order to maintain dignity, well, hero worship and living vicariously. Oh, well, if you had these powers, this is what you should do with them. You should fight crime. You should not kick puppies, whatever. Next, we have on the list of rhetorical devices, it is the anticipation of objection, a technique by which the writer or speaker anticipates objections his audience may have to his argument and points out the error in their objections. Well, they will have different characters do this. To talk back and forth, they'll put the words in the other person's mouth to silence the objection. Next, we have bandwagon. Bandwagon is an attempt to strengthen an argument by convincing the audience that accepting the writer's or speaker's view will put them on the popular or apparently winning side. Well, in superhero comics, it is quite literally the winning side. They just want to fight. And, who doesn't want to be one of the good guys? I mean, who wants to be, nobody, the kids, they grow up, they want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a fireman. Nobody says, I want to be an international terrorist. Maybe Bin Laden. But, nobody says, I want to take over the world. I want to nobody does that. Nobody says, I want to take over, Metropolis with a green rock. No one does that. Conceit is the next rhetorical device. Conceit is an extended metaphor or analogy for two strikingly different things. The entire comic book can be an extended metaphor or analogy. Sometimes they'd say them a little more obvious than others, and the ones who do it poorly are the ones who have been writing the last 8 years and have put message over story. Next device, we have contrast, to compare as to point out striking differences. So basically, this is not like that, and then you make your value judgment. Next, we have correction of erroneous views, pointing out where another's observations need modification or correction. Basically, oh, you're wrong for saying that, and here's why. Again, characters can do this all day long. It doesn't, you know. Next, we have concession. Concession is an acknowledgement of objections to a proposal, similar to anticipation of an objection. Basically, I know that you don't like it, but this is what's going to happen. And things like sometimes we have the hero's moral problems where they have you know to save the people, they have to destroy something precious to somebody for the greater good. Next, we have corrective measures. That is proposing measures to eliminate undesirable conditions. Well, that's can often be the plan of the plot. Next, we have emotional words. Use of words likely to engage strong emotions in the audience. That's straight out. You can tell those words through connotation. Every word has definition and connotation. Definition is what something means, flat out. Book means a bunch of papers bound between two harder pieces of cardboard or something. Uh, connotation is what a word means or how it feels. Such as, this politician, his enemies accuse him of this, right? So the guy's probably innocent, right? This politician was charged with this. Now, charge is a much more formal word, right? Legalese, if you will. And charged with, there's usually evidence, right? So it's to make you feel some way. Extended metaphor is another device. Extended metaphor is a protracted metaphor or conceit which makes a series of parallel comparisons. And that, again, the whole stories can do that. Whole multiple issues can do that. An entire storyline over 100 pages can be a protracted metaphor for something. Next, we have flattery. Flattery is using excessive, untrue, or insincere praise in an attempt to ingratiate oneself with the audience, and therefore make them more likely to accept your opinion. This isn't really used so much in comics. The only thing would be if you identify with the protagonist or the hero to talk that protagonist up, ergo talking you up. Next device we have is holy war, and that is an attempt to convince the audience that God is on the side of the speaker or writer, and that failure to side with the speaker or writer's argument will be the equivalent of a failure to defend God. I don't see this in comic. I don't. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying that it's very rare. You might find a book that does this. If so, great. But it's quite rare in comics. Next, we have hyperbole. And hyperbole is an extravagant exaggeration of fact, used whether for serious or comic effect. Basically, an exaggeration. And you all know what exaggeration is. Sound effects could actually be exaggerations. I mean, biff, pow, bang, if anyone here has been in a fight in their life, you don't hear loud noises like that when you're fighting. Imagery is the next device. Imagery is lively descriptions which impress the image of things upon the mind. Figures of speech. Now, this could be figures of speech, but in a comic, it can also be visuals. That's why heroes wear such bright colors. They're a visual, lively description. I mean, nobody goes out dressed like that in public. Even the superhero movies, which have been quite popular lately, they're toned down, and they're toned down for a reason. I don't know if you may have ever seen some of the older hero shows or live action stuff. They look ridiculous. I mean, nobody could wear tights like that in bright colors. You look like an idiot. The next device we have is irony. An irony is a method of humorous or sarcastic expression in which the intended meaning of the words is the opposite of their usual meaning. Comics obviously can use this. Next, we have last resort. Last resort is a logical argument, often a fallacy, that attempts to convince the audience that they have no other choice but to accept the writer's or speaker's views. So it's just convincing you have no other option, basically. And comics do this through a myriad of ways. I mean, you kind of have no other option but to, root for the hero. I say 95% of the time. Yes, there are a couple of books out there where the hero does something wrong, but most of the time it's extremely hard, if not impossible, to be against the hero in a story. Logical reasoning. Arguing according to the principles of correct reasoning, showing what can be expected because of what has gone before. Comics use this, but they use it in a limited way. They use it in a limited way because comics are, by nature, not that realistic. They're just not. Even the autobiographical ones, slice of life ones, they're much more realistic, but again, you're looking at a drawing, so you know that there's an element of unreality and an element of exaggeration even in the best art styles, and a lot of those autobiographical comics, they're not in good art styles. They're not in hyper realistic art styles, I should say. Next, we have metonymy, and that device is using a part to name the whole, or using the name of one thing for that of another associated with it, such as calling the king the throne or the crown, referring to the president as the White House. Here we have, the Justice League, or justice. You're naming justice when you name the concept of justice as when you name the character or certain characters on Justice League. They're supposed to represent a whole. That whole is justice. Next, we have name-calling. Name-calling is the use of disparaging or abusive names to attack those who oppose the speaker or writer. And here we have, Titano, giant, bad thing. You've got, let's see, trying to think of a few bad guys here. Satanus. That's pretty obvious. Satanus is a villain. In a cultural way, there's a villain called Mongol. Not Mongol, Mongol. But, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. For a Eurocentric bad guy. You'll have a lot of names like that. Let's see. Spider-Man is always a little creepy, but, there's a villain, the Tarantula. Tarantulas are extra creepy, so they hyped it up. The Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. It's right in the name. They're calling them evil. They call themselves evil. I mean, you can't really get around that. All right, the next is parallelism. This device is using the same parts of speech or syntactic structure in 1, each element of a series, 2, before and after coordinating conjunctions, and but, yet, for, nor, or 3, after each of a pair of correlative conjunctions, which are such as not only, but also, neither, nor, both, and, etc. Parallelism, they not often used in comics, but it can be there. See no reason why not. You can use parallelism in your papers. That's the other thing. With all of these devices, please do use all of these, any or all of them, to prove your point. And again, you're going to be arguing a point. That's what rhetoric is. That's what a lot of academic papers are. You're basically, I have this idea. This is why I think it's true. Here is my evidence. This is why I'm right. That's the general sense. Next, we have repetition. That's repeating words or phrases for emphasis when speaking or writing. Sometimes comics do this. The um, magical incantations or whatever it is they use, or Green Lantern's oath, or you know, however it is they change. Let's say, but you can use repetition. Like I will not do this. I will not do this, and I will not do this. There you go. Green eggs and ham. I will not eat them on a train. I will not eat them on a plane. Blah blah blah. Next, we have rhetorical question. And I'm sure you all know what a rhetorical question is, but just to be thorough, that device is to ask a question of an audience to engage them without having a response from the audience. So, like, what would you rather have, a ton of lead or a ton of feathers? It's a rhetorical question. There's no rather. They're both a ton. Would you rather get uh, get an F in chemistry or get an F in biology? You don't want either one of them. Finally, we have sarcasm, which some students have already shown me they have a very good grip on. And that is a taunting, sneering, cutting, or caustic remark. See irony. So those are the rhetorical devices that you should now be familiar with if you were not already familiar. And these are the devices that I would like you to look for. In your 500-word assignment this week, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. Okay, you've got 29 rhetorical devices, excuse me. 29 rhetorical devices. I would like you to find evidence of 7 and cite that evidence in your comic story. That will be your 500-word assignment for this week. And again, since you're citing evidence, you are quoting, you are citing, so you are going to use MLA format, which, the irony was said by Starman, quote, I don't really like that, or I really love that, unquote. And then you would put Starman, page 53, blah, blah, blah. And again, because you're using this is also going to be your first 500-word assignment that you are going to be putting a works cited page on. And yes, I've already checked. MLA does have a format for citing a comic book or graphic novel. So there is a way to do it. There's a correct way to do it, and that is the way I expect you to do it. All right. So yes, you're going to find those, and you're going to find those evidences, and that's what you're going to write up for this week. Okay. Let's see. Now I don't know. There's really not a lot else going on today. Well, again, this is about 40 minutes in, so this would have been the time. You got 20-minute breaks, or 20 minutes total. So 40 to 60. And again, you would have another, so that's another, if you had a debate, you don't have a debate tonight. All right. Yes, okay. Well, I hate to do this, but I'm going to have to cut it short. There's really not that much else I can do from here. We cannot have a question and answer. We can't go back and forth. This is a recording. There are things that we could do, but not on a recording, unfortunately. Okay. Well, that being said, start work on your papers. Read your comic book in full. See if you really do want to do the thesis that you're thinking of, that you've turned in today. You can change your thesis after you've read your book. If you figure out that your thesis is just not going to work, or that you misunderstood it, or whatever, you're not finalized yet. So for your homework, of course, you have the 500 words as usual. You've got the 500 words. I would also tell you to read your comic, and that's 100 pages, and it's a comic, so I know you can do it. So the 500 words, read the comic, make sure of your thesis, of your abstract, rewrite the abstract if you need to, if you are developing, if you change your thesis, you change your mind. Uh, and if not, then begin your research. Look for books, news clippings, articles, what have you. And there is a small but growing uh, base of research on comics. Now, the other thing is, well, and this is something else that you might want to take advantage of, and I encourage you to do so, but you do not absolutely have to. If the comic that you pick has a living writer and artist, feel free to try to contact them. You know, the writer and artist are more the writer than the artist, but when you're trying to figure out what a story means, who better to ask than the writer? Why did you write this? What did you mean? What are you talking about with this? Could give you some very interesting information. And actually, as you can see over my right shoulder on your left-hand side, back in my hallway there, you can see this artwork. This artwork is of Batman, and that was drawn by Sheldon Moldoff. He was the main Batman artist in the 1950s, and I contacted him when I was in graduate school for my thesis. We got to talking, blah, blah, blah. I asked him, hey, are you busy? He said no. So I said, hey, would you mind doing some original art for me? And he said, sure. So I have original Batman art from one of the original artists from the 1950s. He's actually deceased now. He died a few years ago. Just because I was inquisitive and I did some good research. And I had the money. Okay, well, thank you all. I hope you're happy that this is a shorter class. I did think about giving you an extra assignment because this is a short class, because you're not doing the debate, because you're not doing all these things. However, I'll give you a pass this time. Again, do the 500-word assignment, read your entire comic, make sure that you want to do the abstract that you turned in today. You can revise it in any way. And again, start your search for your secondary resources. The sooner you start, the better. All right, well, thank you very much. I hope you all have a great time. I'm probably having a great time myself. If you watch this during class time Thursday evening, I'm likely will be at the reception starting at 7 o'clock. So have a great time, and I will see you all next week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.